Let's get our session started. Detecting and responding to cyber attack, which talks about the first 24 hours after a cyber incident and what is most crucial for survival of your business. This session will share what you need to know to manage the breach effectively. Our presenters for this session are Fraser Jack and Jason Simons. Fraser Jack, founder of the Cyber Collective, and is on a mission to ensure every client can trust their financial professionals to protect their confidential information safely. Fraser has run a financial planning practice and working in and around the profession for over 20 plus years, including many years working with technology. Fraser understands the reasonable steps professionals must take to protect client data. Fraser brings practical insights and analogies to help financial professionals understand confusing, confronting, and unfamiliar cyber security jargon. Jason Simons leads Mills Oakley's cyber risk and insurance practice and has been a specialist cyber and financial lines insurance lawyer for 16 years. Jason has extensive experience in working with organisations, brokers and insurers in managing cyber risk, responding to incidents, regulatory compliance and investigation and third-party disputes. Jason acts as an incident response manager, breach coaching, managing the entire process, and legal advisor addressing the organisation's reporting obligations, communication strategy and contractual obligations and duties owed to the clients. He is an advocate for young lawyers choosing a legal career in cyber risk and insurance and has worked with numerous organisations providing pro bono legal assistance over his entire career. And he's also currently registered as an attorney in New York State and sits in the Law School's Advisory Board of the University of Technology in Sydney and is a National Committee of the Australian Professionals Indemnity Group. Please welcome Fraser Jack and Jason Simons.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a good long introduction, wasn't it? Yeah. Thanks everyone for showing up today to this event and for rushing back from morning tea. We are going to talk a lot about cybersecurity in general, but I wanted to put this slide up because when I mention the word cybersecurity, and often people think, oh, I think we've got that covered. Somebody's done something. I describe cybersecurity as a bit like trying to plug every hole in a sieve. It's a lot of different moving pieces to the jigsaw puzzle. There are a lot of pieces to the jigsaw puzzle, and it's a bit like somebody just saying, oh yes, it's financial services, you know what I'm talking about. There's plenty of different areas in financial services as there is in cybersecurity. So today we are really going to focus on and chunk down a little bit into a few specific pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. We're going to talk very much around that concept of post an attack happening in the business. So rather than all of the talk around getting ready for an attack and doing all those things up front, which we will cover a little bit of, but we're going to try and dive deep into that specifics around what happens in the event. And as you can see by these lovely jigsaw pieces to the puzzle, we're going to cover off on sort of what we call 5 phases of a cyber incident, something in your business. We're going to talk about the concept and why it's important to have a plan in place and what that plan should look like, who's involved in that plan, the insurance piece of that jigsaw puzzle, what communications and some of the costs to the business. So we'll hopefully cover off on all those things today. Before we get started into that, though, there has been some. I know everybody is QAR has been the topic of conversation when it comes to the media releases, but this month, last week, I was particularly interested in some of the ASIC guidance that was recently just put out in this space. They did a Cyber Pulse survey, and they released the findings from that survey. And unfortunately for us, it didn't make the headline press because of all the stuff that was going on with QAR. But essentially what they saw, there was quite a few findings that they came back with. They did a survey. They asked firms to voluntarily fill out what they had in place when it comes to cyber. Essentially, that's come back and said that really there's not, most firms are being reactive in this space. They're not as proactive as they'd like them to be. There was a big gaping hole in what we call supply chain risk, which is really around looking at, as a business, you hold this important, valuable data on your records, but often those records are held by third-party suppliers. It could be your CRM, it could be the business that you work with, and there is a whole supply chain that may not be getting the recognition it deserves. Disconnect between having policies and having those policies enforced and your team trained in them, and there's a hard hat just walking in. That's interesting. That's
Look, it's incident response.
Yeah, excellent.
You never know where it goes.
We don't know what's going on. And of course, having a plan, an up-to-date plan. So those are the things that ASIC have definitely pointed out in the last week or so that are a very, very important piece of the jigsaw puzzle to cover off on, and something that if you haven't read that release yet, you can, or you can let us know and we can give you the short version.
I've got a couple of stats, Fraser. People might be surprised when you sort of say, businesses aren't up to scratch. Just keep in mind that they're saying that 34% of small organisations do not follow any sort of benchmarking, and 30% don't have backups. In my world, if you're not doing those two things, it's going to be more expensive using me in responding to the incident, put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely, and information evidence, but which we'll cover off. Now, I want to introduce this concept to you, and I'm going to get you to start talking about this from this point of view, because we're talking about 5 phases of a cyber incident, and the initial phase, in many cases, is somebody said we've been attacked. No, we haven't. Surely we haven't. Yeah. Talk to us about that first stage we call grief.
Sure. I guess I should keep the language PG. I'm often on phone calls with clients where it's literally just happening. They've gotten a call from IT, or if they're quite a small organisation, they've noticed it themselves, and they kind of go through that initial, oh no, it's happened to us. We're another one of those organisations that you read about, and they start instantly going through that process of, oh gosh, we should have got cyber insurance last year, it was too expensive. Oh no, we got recommended uplifting our cyber security last year, but we just didn't get around to it because we were so busy. It's kind of like that denial and grief, and all in that sort of instant moment. And I have to try and help the client go, look, I appreciate that there's some regret there and this is going to be hard, but we need to really narrow our focus on what's going on in your network, and how can we possibly respond to it as best as we can.
Yeah, now I just want to show of hands. Who here has knows of a firm, knows of a business, knows of somebody who's been part of a cyber incident? Yeah, wow, okay.
There you go.
So most people. Has anybody been in a firm where it's happened to their firm? Yep, excellent, okay, great. And the rest of you have got that to look forward to, I guess, as a joke, but also something that's quite scary moving forward. I want to go back to the point you made that you're on those phone calls with people. Can you tell us a little bit about why you're one of the first people to call?
Yeah, sure. It happens in 2 ways. It'll either come through a referral from whether it's another partner in my firm who's acting for an organisation who's had a cyber incident and they know to call me. So it'll be sort of call within a call. It may be through the insurers that I act for on their panels. The insurer gets a notification, or the insured, through the way the broker sets up the insurance package, they literally use our hotline to contact me directly.
Yeah, so it's called an incident response, and obviously, if you're all familiar with insurance claims departments, it's one of the first ports of call. And we're going to cover off insurance a bit later, so we'll talk about the product a little bit later on. But why is it so important to have a lawyer as, and I say that in the nicest way because I like you.
There's a couple of nice ones.
Yes. Why is it so important to have a legal representative at that point?
Yeah, as timing would have it, Mate, just last week the federal court found that legal professional privilege can apply to investigations of cyber incidents, but it has to be done, surprise, surprise, in the way we've been applying privilege for decades, in that a lawyer needs to be engaged, the lawyer needs to engage the expert. The purpose of the expert's investigation has to be for the dominant purpose of me advising you on your regulatory obligations. And as long as we keep that framework in place and we don't go off into tangents worrying about your profit next year or worrying about other issues that are impacting your business, I can provide you that advice. And if ever a regulator or a plaintiff or any other third party comes knocking asking for details on that investigation, we get to decide what we give to them as opposed to being forced to hand it over. And also I'd like to think that there are lawyers, not just me, but there's a number of lawyers out there that's been doing this for a while, and we understand both that incident response management side of breaches and attacks, but we also understand quite a puzzle of legal regulations that you have to work your way through whilst going through one of the most stressful things in your life. Yeah.
Yep. So we'll get to the reporting and the regulatory requirements in a second. Tell us about what you've seen out there from businesses. We sort of show our hands just before about a lot of people know businesses that have been under attack. What are some of the big things that you're seeing and the main sort of attacks?
Sure. The two types in the last few months is ransomware attacks on your third-party suppliers is probably the number one, whereby it can be your IT service provider or some other third party that you're engaged with. They have an attack, and unfortunately, because of the compromise of their network, they might expose data of yours or even enable a compromise of your network. So you're sort of dragged in innocently to their attack. And the second type is, business email compromises that result in invoice fraud. They are just going through the roof, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I've seen two of the biggest stats with business email and email. So I'm not sure how they're different, but I'm thinking it's client's email and the business's email.
Yeah, I think business email compromise as a term is quite generic in that the threat actor is really just trying to trick you using your business email. It's as simple as that. In whatever way they can get into that email, it may just mean they're just going to fake it and just find your email address just on the internet, obviously very easy, and try and fool you into clicking on a phishing email or something like that. Or if they've been lucky enough to compromise one of your clients or someone that you trust and engage with daily, they then use that access to try and compromise you.
Yeah, now I've got this question about, and I've heard this before, somebody got in but they got into the client's email, so we're okay.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. And there's some truth to that in the sense that you're okay in terms of your cyber security position. Unfortunately though, you can still suffer financial loss if that client has maybe paid an invoice that was owed to you to the actor instead, and you're out of pocket until they decide to pay again, which usually they don't. And then you're caught in this awkward position where, strictly speaking, you've got a contractual dispute because your invoice isn't paid, but you've also got a relationship possibly to maintain. They're a victim of a cyber attack, so you sort of want to be a bit sympathetic, and it's quite a tricky situation.
Have we seen the precedent yet where the client's lawyer says, yes, but they would never have had that information in an email if it wasn't for the relationship they have with you?
Yeah, I've had a number of disputes where us lawyers are having those sort of conversations and letters, and none of this is decided in the courts yet. I know that my firm's got a couple of pieces of litigation on foot addressing these very issues. There's been one tribunal finding in ACT so far. So we're all kind of playing educated guesses amongst all the lawyers, but it'll be interesting to see which side that issue lands on with the courts.
Yep. So an extremely emotional time when you first find out, as we talked about before, it's very difficult to make sound decisions when you're going through a very strong emotional reaction, yep. Which is why they need the legal services. As we get into the next sort of phase, if you like, of 2 weeks of horrendous pain, we call it, that's just really around the concept of, business stops, Business stops and everybody, it's all hands on deck. How do we get all of our clients notified? Do you want to talk us a little through what you see in the space?
Yeah, so I guess setting it up, this type of 2 weeks of horrendous pain isn't going to happen in every type of cyber incident. Of course, if it's an invoice fraud that hasn't impacted your network, or that can kind of be dealt with on the side. But if we're talking about a ransomware attack or a significant, some data breach of some kind, it really is 2 weeks roughly of pain because of the amount of work that has to go into setting up the investigation by expert forensic people. I don't do that. I'm actually not a techie. I have a number of firms that I work with who undertake those investigations. Then obviously we work as your lawyer. There's also communications experts we might bring in if it's particularly complex and multi-layered, and who you need to communicate with, depending on the size of the organisation and who your clients are, who your stakeholders are. You have to be really careful with your comms. And then if it's a ransomware attack, the ransom negotiation is probably, in those initial 2 weeks, going to be the centrepiece of what we're doing.
Yeah, I think if we look at the precedents of some of the larger attacks that have made the news, and the way that they've communicated, there's probably some good ways to communicate. There's some bad ways, or I think probably people look back and say that was a bad way. It's easier to say that than it is to say that's a good way. But tell us about what you're seeing with the communication piece. What's the best way to communicate?
I don't think there's one answer with comms. Every organisation has a different culture internally, and externally its own brand that it wants, and an image that it wants to keep to. So if you're leaning on we want to be ultra transparent with our clients and our stakeholders, then comms with it, very quickly getting something out onto your website, something out onto social media is important. But if you're an organisation that's quite cautious and worried about how your clients are going to react, we might just want to take a pause and think about what are you trying to achieve with your comms. Do we want to wait for a little bit of information from forensics to be able to say, hang on a sec, they actually haven't infiltrated this database, maybe there's no PII that's been extracted. All they had was access to our file servers. They had a bit of a play around, dropped on some ransomware, and we're locked out at the moment, but we think we'll get back up and running in a few days. That's a much better message than we've had a cyber attack, we'll let you know. Because it just leaves so much in the open for people to interpret.
Yeah, and how does that affect me then?
Yeah, definitely.
Can you just give us a rundown of who are the people in the room, as in setting up we call it the war room, whatever it might be, bringing the right people in to do the right jobs and tasks. Can you give us a bit of an overview of who those people are?
Yeah, sure. I'm hoping it's someone who this isn't the centre person, and it's not necessarily your CEO or your managing director or your head of the organisation. There's got to be a key person who's going to be my key contact. I'm hoping that's a person that's kind of been through it before, even if it's through exercises, which we can touch on later. They're my most important person. Who's that? Then, yes, the initial few calls, I'd like the top of the food chain to literally be looking at me on the Teams call or in a physical room with me. I do worry a little bit if they're not engaged in a significant incident right from day one, thinking that it'll all kind of go away, and that goes back to that denial grief phase. And then as I get to know the organisation pretty quickly, I've then got to pull in, okay, do you have internal legal? That could be helpful. Do you have internal comms? Get them on calls. IT, of course. And, or it could be, because they're a smaller organisation, that might only be 2 people, covering all those skill sets. Or it could be your IT's external. So I might ask, can we get your IT provider onto the line? And that creates a different layer of complication. So it is mixed, but it's across those disciplines we've talked about. I'd like a face on the screen presenting.
So generally with a small advice firm or a smallish advice firm, you've got whoever their IT person is, I call their IT guru, often a forensic IT person who comes over the top and needs to know what's in place, which will check all the data, the logs. It could also involve forensic accounting to understand what the loss is.
Yeah, forensic accountings can be really important, and bring them in earlier, particularly if there's been business interruption, getting an idea sort of from those initial few days, when tools are down, are you going to be able to recreate that revenue once we get you up and running again, or is it just gone, depending on the type of business you're running? And having the forensic accountants sort of poke my client with questions around, well, can you keep track of this sort of data around your staff and your clients and things like that, so that when they come in and start crunching some numbers, you can get a better outcome than sort of looking at it 6 months later.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the long-term reporting in a minute, but from the short-term reporting point of view, the timeframes regarding, say, the Privacy Act?
Yeah, the timeframe's tricky. So there's the letter of the law says that once an eligible data breach, if you believe you've had an eligible data breach as defined by the Act, you actually need to notify as soon as practicable. What that means in my world is basically by the time you can draft something, get it out. The 30-day rule, as it's sort of talked about, that's kind of the fallback guideline where if you suspect there's an eligible data breach, you can undertake an assessment, and the regulator says, we want that assessment to take 30 days or less, and but if it takes longer, that's okay, as long as it's reasonable in the circumstances and you can explain why it took longer than 30 days.
Yep. Now, we're used to dealing with multiple regulators. In the cyberspace, there's also multiple regulators, surprise, surprise. Can you give us a quick rundown of who they are?
Yeah, so the other one is the Australian Cyber Security Centre. So that's the government agency that is part of the Australian Signals Directorate, and they basically protect Australia from cyber threats. They want you to tell them, I put it that way, on purpose. You don't have to tell them about your incident unless you happen to be responsible for a critical infrastructure asset. If you do, and that's been materially impacted, you've got to tell them. But if you haven't, it's up to you. And again, that comes back to you as an organisation. Do you want to tell the government and get possibly some assistance from them? Not necessarily, it's not guaranteed. They might have some insights into who the attacker is or things like that. Or do you just want to be a good corporate citizen with informing the government of current attacks? But keeping in mind, current reform is looking at this and the minister's looking at whether they want to make notification compulsory to the ACSC, but it's not yet.
Yep. So we've got some reform coming out next year on the Privacy Act.
Yep.
Yep. And just on that reportable breach, like you said, it's not necessarily compulsory, but a report is made to them every 6 minutes currently in Australia.
Yeah.
Supply chain, we sort of touched on this, is pretty important, but for me, supply chain starts with the client and goes all the way through to, advisor portals, software that you use, your email supplier. Tell us about what you see in that space.
Yeah, I think it's drastically under-assessed by most organisations, particularly smaller ones, because their third-party vendors are essential to your business. You can't afford to do these things internally, so you're partnering up with different vendors, relying on them to an extent, for you to do business. And now we're seeing that they're becoming a real target for attacks. And what I'm seeing is that not just from a cyber, don't just think that this is all just a tech problem, like going in and testing your third party's cybersecurity. It's actually sort of going back to the 101s. Do you have terms of engagement with your vendor? What does it say about when they have an attack? Do they have to tell you, or do they not? How is it going to practically work if you have an attack and it involves what they do? Dealing with those things when there's no attack on foot, just having a conversation, picking up the phone and going, look, I'm a bit worried about if you get attacked or I get attacked. How's it going to work? I couldn't find our contract. Can you send it to me? Having a look, and so, because that's the first thing I'm going to ask you for, particularly if it's an attack on your vendor. I'm going to say, look, flick me your terms. I'm going to have a look to see what rights we have, just to basically demand some information, because they might not want to tell you stuff straight away.
Yeah. So the way that we talk about that up front is to know what your obligations are, to know where the contract is, to be able to gather it, to ask the questions about their security up front. Because if you've got that evidence to say, I did ask about security and everything they gave me was great, that's kind of a defensive mechanism, right? At the time of a claim, you've got that information on hand. And that can be tricky for firms when, say, their CRM is, the contract's been signed by the licensee rather than the advice firm, or all those sorts of things, so it can be interesting. But I would say to everybody, just go and get the information.
Yeah.
Ask for the information, keep it on file.
And in my experience, you know, in the heat of an incident, there'll be a lot said about, oh, I'm going to sue them, I can't believe they've let this happen, how much damage it's done to our business. Most of the time you don't sue them, because once you get through the attack, you just want to move forward, and it's so expensive to do that. You're better off dealing with it up front and being able to manage the incident better with your third parties.
Yep. Excellent. Which takes us to the sort of the next phase. Once you get that through that 2 weeks of stopping business and trying to put the fire out, I guess, onto the sort of the next, 3 months, 6 months, 1 to 3 months of cleaning up, recovery.
Yeah. How long's a piece of string with the 1 to 3 months sometimes? Because, when we're talking about an organisation that might have had backups that were encrypted and couldn't be recovered, or if their system basically had to be built from the ground up, it can be a significant task and expense. So it can take some time. So that tech side of things can be rolling on for a while. Then you've got the regulator that you might have informed of your data breach, asking further questions, possibly formally investigating you, hopefully not, if we've managed the incident well. And that can take a number of months in them just asking more and more information about the breach, maybe what you haven't done as well as what they'd like, so they'll poke you about those things. And then how do you communicate sort of all that going on with the people that you sent the initial comms sort of in those first few weeks or month? They want an update, because no doubt your comms would have said something like, we'll keep you updated as we know more at the bottom of it. And so this is the as you know more stage, and you have to sort of manage, well, maybe we didn't really find out how it originally occurred. A lot of cyber attacks happen for reasons you can't discover ultimately, and so managing those notifications. And then in terms of your brand and how it's gone through all this, that's going to take a bit of reflection on, okay, so we got this kind of feedback from staff, from customers, from stakeholders. How are we going to now kind of rebuild that trust, rebuild our brand again? And that may be expensive if you need to show uplifting of cybersecurity or, some sort of campaign, if you like, in working with people on how you're going to do better in the future.
Yeah, I think for me the brand thing is massive. I think it probably is for the people in the room as well. Their clients will make instant decisions whether they believe that they're pre-invested in their cybersecurity or not. And I think that starts well before a breach. That's something that you really need to talk to your clients about often enough for them to understand your confidence in what you're doing already and making sure you've got a lot of things in place well before this stage. Because I think if you get to this point and you haven't spoken to them or communicated well, there's a good chance that you're going to struggle to maintain them. The next phase. We can sort of talk about this concept of, and I describe it a bit like if someone steals your car, you may get your car back or you don't get your car back. When somebody steals data, there's a pretty good chance that it's out there, and even if you get it back, there's going to be copies around. Yeah,
you can never trust the criminals you're dealing with, of course. So in this zombie year phase, so I'll give an example of a few ransomware attacks I've managed this year where we've engaged with the attacker. We have paid the ransom. Please don't judge my client. And what we negotiated with the criminal was that regarding the data that they proved that they had in their hands, they promised to not leak it on the dark web. And the way they do that is they actually provide, it's very professional, it's actually a negotiation. You'd be surprised how sophisticated it is. We're usually dealing with the communications team, not the tech team of these ransomware groups. They're large organisations, a lot of them.
The corporate communications department
they do.
Of the hacking cartel.
They do, and they'll also talk with their legal team, they'll also talk with their tech team, their negotiators. You can be dealing with 3 or 4 different teams within the ransomware group. And what we negotiated with their legal team was a set of conditions regarding payment. We would only pay you if you promised these 8 things, one of which they had to provide proof that they'd destroyed the data that they had in their possession, and they literally provide a video of them destroying the data. Now, of course, can you trust that completely? No. But these are the steps that you can actually take in sort of preventing the harm being that long tail harm to the people whose personal information has been at least accessed initially. Then the long tail continues though now, because we have a very, very active regulator now, very engaged, better funded, much broader powers of investigation. We also have plaintiff law firms licking their lips about class actions and also potentially smaller claims when the Privacy Act allows for that in the next probably 6 months. So there's the breach, but then there's the sort of the what comes after, and that can that's just something that you're going to have to unfortunately live with in a sense, because you're not going to know necessarily right up front whether your customers or people impacted are going to be the ones that want to do something about it, or whether your breach is the one that the regulator wants to make an example of, or something like that.
Yep. And my thoughts are here: if you've got clients and their information's been leaked, let's say they've got super funds, and those super funds have all got numbers, and all your investment numbers. It's kind of a process during this, during the cleanup phase, really, of just trying to issue new policy numbers, new superannuation numbers. You know, getting them out of those older or different accounts into new accounts. So it could mean, you know, rolling money from one to another. It could be changing the investments that you got set up for them so that those investment numbers are different. There's certain things that you can change and certain things that you can't. Changing a tax file number is I think impossible. But you know, changing people's passports and helping them get new driver's license and those sorts of things are possible. On to stage 5. This is the litigation piece. And as you said before, as you mentioned with class actions, for bigger firms, class actions obviously. For smaller firms, the litigation from those who were grieved, but also from the regulators.
Yeah, and also potentially third parties. If it's a invoice fraud scenario, as I said, it's just a contractual dispute most likely, which then brings in that cyber element to it. You could have smaller claims. Privacy complaints can be made by individual customers to the regulator, where we're likely to see a direct right of action introduced into the legislation, which enables one person to take you to court for the harm that they've suffered. Now, the amount of harm, financial harm, that they're going to be able to claim is still sort of being talked about a lot. So are they going to bring a claim against you for $500? Unlikely. But if they've somehow suffered something more significant, or if there's a group of them that want to get together, then it's definitely something you have to be aware of. And then the first bullet point there goes back to what I said originally. Having that privilege attached to what you did throughout the investigation, this is where it matters. Because the last thing you want to do is have to hand over, all those Teams meeting messages that you were sending to each other in the panic, where you said things like, "Oh, I wish we did that 2 months ago when our IT guy says we were supposed to do that," or "I can't believe we put the passwords in that file, on the desktop," and, making all those admissions about what you did terribly. I don't mind if you whinge to me about those things. That's fine. We just manage them, we deal with them. They're cloaked in privilege, and I take them on board. But if you just communicate that with each other and with your IT person investigating, it's all discoverable, and it's not going to help you.
Yep. Now, I guess when we think about what people should have in place already before this takes place, we talk about the concept, I talk about the concept of having a plan before and then a plan for during and after a cyber incident. This is obviously the concept of having a plan, knowing how to behave in that situation, because you've actually got to document it out. Everybody is going to behave this way. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We need to ring. We need to do that. We need to have the phone numbers printed out, not in our computer. That's locked. Yeah. Talk us through this concept of having a cyber incident response plan in place and the difference between firms that do and maybe that don't when they come to.
Yeah, sure. The ones that don't panic as much because it's, you're working the plan. I love when I get a call and we're activating a plan. We've called you. We've now got this team together. These people are, playing their role. we've been through this before, because as part of a plan you actually are workshopping it, how it will look, running a few exercises. So it's like you've been there before, even if you haven't been there before. That's what a plan is all about. And probably the number one thing that I know you and I have talked about a lot is the practicality of getting the 5-6 team members together isn't as simple as you think, because if you don't have, you know, mobile numbers saved outside your work phone or work network, or if you only run Teams through your work email, things like that, if you don't have alternative ways of communicating, it's going to be practically difficult to get together, and it may be that you can't trust the way you get together online. So just having those simple steps as to, like you said, personal mobile numbers, having a WhatsApp group, things like that, that just make life so easy in those first few hours that people don't push themselves into preparing unless you have a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the concept of what we call it a fire drill, a cyber drill, or you know, anybody who has ever done first aid training will know that they have to continue that training and do it fairly regularly. And the more times you train in it, the more you're able to respond at that time. Just inside that plan, I think a big part of it that we sort of haven't touched on yet is just gathering the evidence. So a big part of that plan is to know who's going to be gathering the evidence, all that sort of stuff. Tell me about when you get to that litigation stage, or how important that evidence is.
Yeah, there's key pieces of information, the initial kind of incident report, and it can be by any staff member. It could be a junior IT person, it could be just a regular employee who finds something, and they fill out a form, and we've got that record, and it's really important to have that. And then you've got your running evidence trail of what people are finding, what forensics are asking for from IT, how you're dealing with your communications and your stakeholders. You end up with this evidence trail that then, if something arises down the track, like the regulator goes, how come you took 47 days to tell your customers, and why was that? Well, as you can see, you can provide real-time evidence of, well, on day 22 we were still dealing with this mess, and that's why we just weren't ready yet to tell people, as opposed to on day 48 when you're working out going, what were we doing then? So
yeah. Did you tell them?
Yeah,
was I supposed to?
I can't remember. I'm doing a lot of these, so
yeah. So the communication pack is also I think is a big piece of that jigsaw puzzle. Now we'll talk about insurance, because I've had lots of comments over the year of cyber insurance. Can you go to show of hands who has cyber insurance in their practice?
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, great. I've had comments over the years that we're not really sure insurance is worth it, as in, all sorts of comments through to, these days I think it's a bit of a necessity in the business. Cyber insurance used to be part of often an attachment to a PI policy or a management liability policy. Can you give us a bit of an overview of where the insurance market has come to these days?
Sure. I think everyone probably realised a couple of years ago it got really expensive. That's off the back of, we were giving it away almost for free, 6-7 years ago, and then we had a mountain of claims come in, particularly of the ransomware type, which were just huge payouts for insurers. So prices started going up. We also had increased demand, so price going up. What we've seen now is the market's probably levelled out. I wouldn't say, unfortunately, it's not cheaper, but it's levelled out, and there's more capacity in the market. There's more options out there, working with a broker who can go to a number of insurers who'll provide quotes, as opposed to a year ago, you might not even get a quote unless you're at a particularly good standard of, security. Now, what I'm seeing is that, you might just need to have some minimum levels of controls in place, like MFA and those basics, and you're going to get a few offers from the market to be able to choose. Whether it's affordable to you or not, I don't know, but at least there's some availability.
I kind of think it is affordable in the sense that I think most of our clients would spend somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 a year on their cyber insurance packages. I think it's a pretty good value for money considering what it does. I describe it as the fire brigade, which is your part of, coming and putting the fire out, as well as the rebuilder coming in to rebuild it. So a long way through that process.
Yeah, I think affordability, if you're paying those sort of dollars for it and you have an excess of, say, $500, a couple of grand, think about the people I've talked about already in helping an organisation through. You've got myself, you've got IT forensics, possibly comms. The fees are going to quickly build up in those initial few weeks. So you're going to be looking at tens of thousands of dollars to manage any sort of sizable incident. And then you might be looking at the long tail if you do have any third-party liability exposure or regulatory interest. Again, legal costs and possible actual damages, it's worth it.
Now, I've got a bit of a bone to pick with you because I know that you've been involved in some of the wording in PDSs when it comes to insurance policies.
Yeah.
Why are they all so different? Why is it like trying to choose a mobile phone 20 years ago contract?
Yeah, it's so we get the coverage work as well. Look, isn't it funny? Like insurers, they have their own way of phrasing things, writing things. I don't get asked by an insurer, I'll just draft this one from scratch. It'll be, we've got this one, from America or one from London. Can you basically just make as few changes as you can to this policy and put it out into the Australian market? And so it's going to look very different to the insurer next door because they brought theirs in through their old underwriting, and then you've got brokers who are writing their own policies as well. So they're never going to be the same. There's no standard wording of cyber policies, but there's a fairly standard groups of cover now. So I think we get that. We get generally what the cover should be in a sort of traditional cyber policy now.
Yep, fantastic. And if you've got any questions on insurance, throw them in the app, and we'll see if we can get to them. As we're sort of coming to a wrap up here, talk us through your tips, your checklist.
Yeah. I was chatting to my wife about I wanted to provide clients with something easy to remember when you get the question of, well, where do I start? Because it all seems a bit information overload. And she actually came up with check your cyber, and you work your way through the acronym. And I think it gives you a good understanding of what I think any organisation of any size, complexity of cyber security, wherever you're at, right at the beginning, somewhere in the middle, you can run through those 5 things, and I guarantee doing any one of them, 2 of them, all of them, you're going to get some value out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. We just need to put her name on there to credit the slide then.
Yeah.
Look, my tips, I think, from here have a structured approach. Too often, I think it's the same thing in advice. You would have clients come into you where they have bits and pieces, band-aids everywhere, and then your role is to take that through and put a structured approach in place. Often there's ad hoc things when it comes to cyber, and it's about going, right, we need to start from scratch. What does the regulation require us to have? What are all the things that we should be doing? Do we have those? And going through a structured approach. To me, 90% of these incidents involve a team member, and so training those team members and ongoing training and testing of those team members is important. It's in the regulatory guidance, and a lot of if you're in this room and you're working for a large corporate, I guarantee you're getting cyber training, and unfortunately most small businesses aren't able to or don't replicate that. So I think teams, of course, should be the first line of defence rather than the weakest link. And again, my other tip is just to keep evidence of everything. Just try and make sure that you're saying what you've done, keeping information around what you did gather, why you made decisions when it comes to cyber. Let's get into some of the questions. Our contact details are up there. I can't read the iPad without my glasses.
No. Bring it in.
What signs do you need to turn a computer into a brick? Not sure. What signs?
Not sure about what signs, but yeah, look, it happens all the time that a device becomes a brick as a result of an incident because you just can't, forensically, you can't recover it, and so you got to let it go. And cyber insurance can cover that if you're lucky, if you check your terms. But there can be a betterment or replacement cover in there for brick devices. So, yeah.
Cyber insurance, how much is enough? Very good question. And again, neither of us are insurance brokers, so we're not allowed to tell you officially.
No.
And this session's being recorded. However, I can tell you that a lot of our clients tend to have between $500 and $2 million worth of cover. Replacing your computers and your network and that initial stuff is probably not the big cost. The big cost is if you've got a lot of clients. Think of it as a mental health claim. It can go on for a long period of time, and the longer the period of time, and the more cleaning up you have to do, the more expensive and the more professionals you're going to need.
Yeah, and there might be some sub-limits in there. So if the main third-party limit or is the 2 million, just be careful that you keep an eye on what's your incident response cover, what's your engineering, social engineering fraud cover, because there might be some sub-limits or your business interruption cost cover. There might be actually a gap between when it happens and when the cover kicks in, like a couple of days. Those things matter, so make sure you check that.
Yep. Sis, can you give an example of insurance that paid out and maybe a little story of how much paid out?
Yeah, sure. I sent an invoice to an insurer on Sunday night. They'll pay.
Yep.
So I'm acting for a number of insurers at the moment and on probably about a dozen attacks, and my invoices go to them. So that's probably the simplest example I can give you, as well as the forensic team's invoices are going to the insurer. And in each of those instances, these particular insurers are at the smaller to mid-market size, so the excesses are actually being quite small. So it's been a good result.
Noticing that you have a cyber incident, how did most people find out?
Yeah, it's a great question. Most people find out, I think just somebody notices something, contacts IT, and IT, either your external IT or internal, then contacts someone more senior and says, I think this is a problem. If you've got some sort of endpoint protection and you're actually getting it, you're getting monitoring by a managed service provider or something like that, and they get an alert, then of course that's a more sophisticated way of it coming to you. But if you're just talking about that kind of like internal, how do you find out, then yeah, it can happen in a variety of ways.
Yeah, there's a comment here that talked about if suppliers don't have multi-factor authentication, and I think the answer for me for that is it's your client data, you collect it. If you're using a supplier that doesn't ask you to put it in, most of the insurers' policies would require it. The government certainly talk about it in a lot of their guidance. It's an essential item. So if those providers aren't providing multi-factor authentication of some description, then I'd be thinking that maybe there's another supplier.
Yeah, like if you're not using MFA and your supplier or a supplier isn't, you really need to make that a priority, that you get your team on board in using it. It's free. There's a range of different versions out there, and then I'd encourage you not to just use the sort of like standard settings on an MFA where it's like you do it once and you're in for 30 days. You've got to think about doing it as regularly as possible. I know it's a pain. My office does it every 3 days. It's a MFA, and they do it at the application level. So you've got to go into your document management with an MFA every 3 days, your email every 3 days, your internet every 3 days, each one. So what usually happens on a Monday morning is you do about 5 MFAs to start work. The reality though, after the Ebsworth breach from earlier in the year, is that if the hacker got into a particular application, that's all they get. They might just get in that hallway, nowhere else, because of the added security of having to get through somewhere else.
Yeah, we've got a question here about determining, how do you determine whether you pay or not pay a ransom?
You have to look at what are the consequences going to be for your business for not paying, and whether you're okay with that. So if paying means getting the decryption tool, which used to be the priority a little while ago, it probably isn't so much now that backups are getting a bit better, but so getting that business recovery, getting back online and things like that, you want that decryption tool. And if your business is literally revenue is crashing as a result of not working, you might need to pay. If you've got a good recovery system in place and you don't need to get the decryption, then you've got to start thinking about, well, do they have data that I'm prepared to allow be leaked by the actor because you haven't paid their their demand? And are you prepared to live with what then comes? And I can advise you on, well, this is probably what's going to happen. What they've got is going to be leaked. They're going to talk about it in their forums. They'll probably write to a few media outlets. They'll probably contact customers directly. They'll do all those nasty things that criminals do to try and force you into changing your mind, or just to spite you because you've not paid.
Yep.
But if you're saying, no, we're against it, we're not paying, like, all right, let's do it. Let's deal with the fact that you're not paying, and yeah, it's your option.
And insurers keep a bit of a log, don't they, in a recognition with each other as to who is least trusted and who could be more trusted to keep their word?
In terms of the ransomware groups?
Yeah.
We lean on the professional negotiators. So there's organisations that we work with. So they're not the forensic people. There's actually organisations that you engage to do the negotiation, because they have the tools to hop onto these league sites and forums and communicate with the actors safely. It's a very unsafe place to communicate, and so they do that safely for us. They also have the skill set to be able to, communicate in a way effectively. But most importantly, they keep then a data set of who's keeping their promises that I described before. When they said they wouldn't leak and then they leaked, they get a big, mark against their name, and they'll tell you, look, if you pay those guys, they'll probably leak anyway, so you might as well not. And the groups know that. The ransomware groups know that. So they actually...
that's the thing that's holding them accountable.
Their brand matters to them. So within the forums, on the dark web, you can find out, what's their reputation like? Do they pay? And they gossip about each other, and they're all they use each other's services as well. There's lots of multi-organisation groups. They'll team up. We've had examples this year where two significant groups got together and simultaneously undertook attacks and tried to get double ransom payments and things like that, and how they were going to extort. I think it backfired to an extent because it was really hard for us negotiating with them to know whether, if we paid ransom group A, is B going to still do something if we don't pay them? And insurers, they don't really want to pay twice. That's a really difficult thing to justify to an insurer. So it's a tricky one.
Fantastic. And I knew of a group that attacked an IT firm. The IT firm went back and attacked them to get the information back. And the first thing they did was they said, "Hey, they're not allowed to do that. That's illegal. This firm's done something illegal. This is the ransomware." So yeah, it is quite amazing. There's a question here on email. Come and ask me about that after, because that's about a 45-minute answer. I think we're being wrapped up.
Apologies for wrapping up this fantastic session. So insightful about what to do and stay vigilant as a team